Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Instead of the scheduled crime report, what I wanted to do today is to make a statement instead. Daniel Penny, the violent killer, has been charged at long last by Alvin Bragg, but of course I think we all know where this one's heading. The charge was about what I thought it would be, second-degree manslaughter. It should have been second-degree murder minimum. Alvin Bragg has been stuck on the horns of a dilemma. He knows public opinion is demanding charges, but he also knows that the white-moneyed interest in New York, who put him in office, want black people to be under threat. They want the ethnic cleansing to continue. His job is to help normalize the killing of black people in the streets. It's meant to embolden anti-black racism and hopefully expedite the wholesale slaughter of black people and try to scare black people out of New York City. The white media is already ramping up their own propaganda in this case. And before I go any further, I need some of the hardheads to understand that this isn't about Jordan Neely in and of himself. I know there are some folks who are going to be saying, oh, are you caping for this guy? What about his family? This, that, and the third. Listen here. The heinous killing of Jordan Neely has tremendous meaning to these white supremacists. In fact, it has as much as the killing of Trayvon Martin. It's seen as an event that the white supremacists hope will lead to more killings of unarmed black people. To them, this is a seminal event, if they can win it. Last week, I posted for you on my Twitter page that Newsweek's website posted a story in which they actually admitted that the passengers on that train who watched Daniel Penny strangle Jordan Neely to death were telling the killer to stop. They were telling him he was going to kill Mr. Neely. But, as the video shows, the killer actually began to strangle Mr. Neely even more forcefully after that, not less. Daniel Penny wanted to kill Jordan Neely. This was no accident. It was deliberate. And he can't say that he didn't know what was going on. He can't say it truthfully. You had other passengers telling him. So last week, Newsweek actually told the truth. But now that it's been reported that Daniel Penny's going to have charges put on him, however weak, Newsweek is now doing what the white media always does, lie, either by saying things that didn't happen or, in this case, intentionally leaving out things that did. Newsweek did a hit piece masquerading as a what we know piece. They made sure to mention their one and only talking point. Well, Jordan Neely did have a few scrapes with the law, but they said absolutely nothing about Daniel Penny other than that he was a Marine. Apparently, this clown hasn't done anything else with his entire life other than to get in the Marine Corps and to strangle Jordan Neely to death. Apparently, those are the only two things Daniel Penny has ever done in his entire life. Newsweek completely left out that the passengers had told the killer he was going to kill Mr. Neely if he didn't stop strangling him. Apparently, Newsweek didn't remember their own reporting from just a few days ago. And apparently the fool who wrote this garbage, as well as her editors, didn't know that the killer snuck up behind Mr. Neely when he strangled the man to death. They left that out too. Daniel Penny wasn't under threat. Jordan Neely was. The white media knows that they can't justify what the killer did, so instead their goal is to do what they always do, dirty up the victim. They know that Daniel Penny wasn't under threat. They also know that the killer snuck up behind his victim. That's not what someone who's afraid for their life does. Daniel Penny could have stayed in his seat and let the transit police handle the situation, which, by the way, is their job. Or he could have moved to another subway car if he was really that disturbed. But he didn't do that. Instead, he chose the one course of action that would require him to get into a physical altercation with the man that he killed. That's not the behavior of someone who is scared. And the white media is trying to push a narrative that Mr. Neely was threatening people. That's the word they keep, threatening people. Again, for a man who was apparently threatening people, did he hit anyone? No. Did he have a weapon with him? No. What did he do? He was yelling. See, this is all about that nonsense weasel words. Well, he was attacking people. They mean verbally attacking. Well, he was threatening. They mean verbally. They're talking about he said things that made me feel my feelings. From what I've seen, the white media is going to try to recycle the same old tactic they used with the murder of Michael Brown. Have some so-called eyewitness, who is going to be white, of course, because we got to make sure people understand we're getting on code. They're going to have somebody who's as biased as the day is long, some wild-eyed idiot who's going to make all kinds of outrageous claims about Mr. Neely, all without proof, and fortunately without him able to refute any of it. And the white media is going to give these alleged eyewitnesses as much time and space as they want and let them say whatever they want, and they won't vet any of it, they won't question any of it, they'll just report it as fact. There will be no attempt at all to try to investigate because this isn't about the facts, it's about them promoting an anti-black agenda. Their entire rationalization of this killing comes down to only one talking point, a false claim that the killer was in some sort of imminent danger. But now, of course, we're seeing that they're starting to shift from that. They're having to pivot from that. Now what they're trying to say is, well, he was acting to protect other people on the train. Well, we know that's not true. Jordan Neely never laid a finger on his killer or anyone else. On the contrary, it was Daniel Penny who was the one who snuck up behind Mr. Neely and strangled him to death. And he ignored the other passengers who told him to stop. Everyone else on the train, including the very people who helped the killer to take Jordan Neely's life, knew that the killer was going to kill this man, and were telling him to stop. That should be in every single story about this killing, but it's not. The only thing that they can claim is that Mr. Neely was yelling. That's not an imminent threat to anyone. Rupert Murdoch's propaganda mill, the New York Post, is praising the killing of Mr. Neely, no surprise. They're giving page space to some alleged retiree who says that she saw the whole thing and that she thanked the killer after he strangled Mr. Neely to death. But at no point does she offer any proof of any threat. She contradicts herself. She says that Mr. Penny did not stand up. He did not engage with the gentleman. He said not a word. It was all Mr. Neely that was threatening the passengers if he did not get what he wants. That's not true at all. The reality is the killer did stand up. How the hell did he strangle Jordan Neely to death from his chair? The video clearly shows them on the ground. There's no way in hell that he did anything other than get up. He had to have gotten up and snuck behind his victim and strangled him to death. When you read this bilge, you see that there's absolutely nothing to justify using a chokehold on an unarmed man. However, they do use all the innuendo they can in this piece to try to make it seem as if Mr. Neely was shooting people, when in reality he hadn't harmed anyone. Look at the wording they use. Penny did not initially engage with Mr. Neely during the wild rant until things got out of hand and he felt the urge to step in. Now look at that wording. There's all kinds of qualifiers there in weasel words. What does this even mean? There's nothing specific here. And that's the entire point. What does things got out of hand mean? Mr. Neely wasn't putting a finger on anyone. He didn't have a weapon, so what got out of hand? There was no fistfight going on. He wasn't swinging at anybody. He wasn't running up on anyone either. They're just making stuff up. And what does the killer felt the urge to step in mean? Step into what? What was going on that he felt the need to step into? To step in means that he wasn't going to do it for himself. That's what step in means. You're intervening. Well, I think I need to step in here. Step into what? What that means is Daniel Penny intentionally made the decision to get into something that had nothing to do with him. But if he was stepping in, then who was being attacked? Who was he stepping in for? Who was Mr. Neely attacking? No one. If Mr. Neely was attacking anyone, then shouldn't we have been told by now who exactly he was attacking and how? Shouldn't the white media be presenting to us, here are the people that Jordan Neely was beating up? Instead, we hear vague, imprecise innuendo about threatening behavior, but nobody can tell us what the threatening behavior was, or who was being threatened, or how. Daniel Penny wasn't under any threat at all. That's why he was able to sneak up behind his victim, and he killed him without a scratch. These are weasel words. It's exactly the kind of fairy tale innuendo that I would expect from a lawyer, one who knows that his client is guilty, but who is trying to use desperate, vague, indistinct, imprecise language to give people the false impression that the killer didn't actually commit a crime. It sounds like a lawyer who knows that he can't say that the client was under threat because he wasn't. And he can't even say, well, my client had to act to help other people out because there was no threat to anyone else either. This is the white media's strategy. Just repeat that he was a threat over and over and over again. He was threatening people over and over again, and hope that people start to believe it. Hope that people don't actually ask for evidence. They'll just see the white media saying it, and hopefully they'll just go along with it. You know, I know a thing or two about writing, and I know when someone's trying to bluff their way past me with weasel words. I know when someone's trying to substitute innuendo in place of what should be facts and evidence instead. Somebody who should be presenting to me the evidence, but instead they're giving me innuendo. This is a cheap lawyer's trick. So I wasn't at all surprised when I looked to see who wrote this garbage, and I saw the name Joe Tacopino. And if that name sounds familiar to you, it should. Joe Tacopino is one of Donald Trump's lawyers. In fact, Tacopino was the one who lost Trump's defamation suit a couple of days ago. This is who Rupert Murdoch's New York Compost has writing this story. Shouldn't that idiot Tacopino be working on an appeal so he can try to help his sleazy client hold on to that $5 million that he's on the hook for now? So that's why this hit piece uses weasel words that were clearly written by a shyster who's trying hard as hell to imply the situation was dangerous when it wasn't, and that the killer was trying to step in, when the truth is Daniel Penny alone initiated and carried out the only act of violence that occurred that day. And Tropicana's not alone. This is what the white media is doing in general. They let the killer's lawyers say whatever they want, and they just go ahead and repeat it. No rebuttal, no balance, no vetting, no anything. Now, as black people, we have to be able to recognize the slimy tactics the enemy tries to use, and we have to call them out because no one else will. This is blatant anti-black white supremacy happening in New York City. Consider this. Jonathan Majors was arrested immediately after his white girlfriend called the police, and Alvin Bragg put charges on Mr. Majors immediately that very day. Daniel Penny, on the other hand, is caught on video strangling a black man to death, and it takes Alvin Bragg over a week to get his lard behind in gear. And even then he charges him with a lowball charge. Oh, but it's not racial though, right? Now with all this mess going on, black people more than ever have to be in a constant state of readiness. There's just no other way. Daniel Penny carried out an ambush killing of Mr. Neely. Make sure you're not the next victim. Make sure you are mentally and physically ready to protect your life and to come to the aid of any other black people in need. Be mentally prepared so you don't get caught unaware, or so that you don't hesitate when the time comes to protect yourself or others. Be physically prepared because you don't want to be a soft target for these ambush killers. Black people in critical situations all too often are hesitant to protect themselves because they know that the police and the prosecutors are on the side of the anti-black racists. Well, the only reason Kenneth Walker is alive today is because he didn't hesitate to defend himself. The same goes for John White, who protected his family from a white supremacist lynch mob who came to his doorstep, some white supremacist thugs who attacked his son at a party. And by the way, I keep bringing up John White's name in this instance for a reason. You know that he lived in Long Island when this happened, right? John White and his son were attacked in Long Island, and that's important because Daniel Penny is a Long Island resident too. That's where the killer of Jordan Neely is from, Long Island. Oh, but this isn't racial, remember? What possible connection can you make between this and race at all? Oh, it's just a tragic confluence of events. No, it was not. It was a deliberate killing. That's what happened. These are the things the white media is not telling you because they're the cheerleaders and the mouthpieces of anti-black violence. The regular forces of white supremacy, the police, have lost public support, and they're being punished for the first time ever. Not enough of them, but it's actually happening now. And the white media took the police's side, so when the cops lost, the white media lost too. Big. Now the white media is trying to protect the irregular forces of white supremacy. Thugs like Daniel Penny. They may not wear police uniforms, but they carry out ambush killings of black people just like the police do. And they depend on their fellow racist pals in the police not to arrest them for their crimes. The white media's silence on Daniel Penny is telling. What did other soldiers in the Marines think of him? Have they talked to family and neighbors, co-workers? No, they're not trying to dig up any dirt on this guy. That goes against their narrative. Every time the white media tries to protect some killer by refusing to give any details, we always find out later that the killer had a ton of complaints against them. The white media, however, spent days not saying a word about Daniel Penny. They wouldn't even say his name. I'm starting to think that maybe they found something on this guy that was so egregious that they were terrified to even say who he was. Now, regardless of whether you think Mr. Neely's family is doing all they can to get justice, that doesn't mean that we don't call out what's happening here. The white supremacists are scared of this case. Fortunately for them, they have Alvin Bragg, who will be offering this killer a sweetheart plea deal if he thinks the public attention on this case begins to decrease. Bragg knows that this case isn't like the one against Miya Ponsetto, the so-called Soho Karen. You recall she attacked a black child in a New York City hotel. Alvin Bragg had an open and shut case against her, but just like his predecessor, Cy Vance, who refused to prosecute Amy Cooper, Alvin Bragg also refused to prosecute Miya Ponsetto. Because they only prosecute black people in New York, don't you know? Alvin Bragg needs this latest case against Daniel Penny to go the same way as the one with Miya Ponsetto. He only brought a second-degree murder charge because he thinks that that's the perfect landing spot for him to reduce the charges later on when he inevitably offers a plea deal. That's where he wants to go with this. Alvin Bragg is hoping that this empty gesture of second-degree manslaughter will get the public to be pacified. They'll look and go, okay, at least he's bringing charges now, and he's hoping the public will lose interest and move on to something else. And the second the public does, Alvin Bragg will quietly offer Daniel Penny a sweetheart plea deal for no time served, just like he did with Miya Ponsetto. He's trying to have it both ways. He wants to have some headlines that will get the public heat off of him. And then he wants to go ahead and do what he wanted to do from the very beginning. No charges, no prosecution. The fix is definitely in. What Alvin Bragg is trying to engineer right now, this basically acquittal by the side door, is exactly what Ken Thompson did in the case of Peter Liang. This is what these little slimy New York prosecutors like to do. Alvin Bragg needs for this case to end the same way, but he doesn't want to have to answer to the voters for it. When it comes to personal safety, we as black people have spent too long being reactive. We gotta be proactive. We must practice self-defense. You can't become a good pilot without practice. You can't become a good chef without practice. And you can't become a good protector of yourself or your people without practice. Practice is the most important component of being ready. We broke the back of the regular forces of white supremacy. Now it's time to turn our attention to the irregular forces and give them the treatment too. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. R. Laz, Anthony Pollard, Gregory Franklin, Insane Optimist, and Timothy Hall. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.